Cowboy spotted a woman and baby in a collapsed cabin. He dug them out with his bare hands. The cowboy rode slowly across the wide land as the sun began to sink behind the hills. The sky turned soft orange and pale pink, and the air grew colder with every passing minute. He had been on the trail all day, checking fences and looking for a lost calf that never showed itself. His horse moved with a calm and steady rhythm, and the sound of its steps mixed with the low whistle of the wind. The cowboy's thoughts were quiet. He was thinking about the warm meal waiting back at his small home and the fire he would light to keep the night away. The land around him felt empty, but in a peaceful way. Tall grass swayed gently, and a few birds flew low across the open space, heading toward their nests. He pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and looked ahead, planning the path he would take to get home before the dark fully settled in. That was when he heard a sound that did not belong to the wind or the animals. It was faint, almost lost in the breeze, but it reached his ears and made him slow his horse. He lifted his head and listened carefully. The sound came again, soft and weak, like a cry that was trying not to be heard. His heart gave a small jump. He turned his horse in the direction of the sound and guided it forward, scanning the land with sharp eyes. After a short ride, he saw something strange in the distance. A small cabin stood near a group of trees, but it did not look right. Part of the roof had fallen in, and the walls leaned at odd angles. Broken wood lay scattered on the ground around it. The place looked like it had been caught in a strong storm or had simply given up after many years of standing alone. The cowboy tied his horse to a nearby tree and walked closer, his boots crunching on dry leaves and small sticks. The air felt colder near the cabin, and a shadow seemed to hang over it. He called out, his voice loud and clear, asking if anyone was there. For a moment, there was only silence. Then he heard it again, a soft, weak sound, like a small cry. His chest tightened, and he rushed forward. He stepped around fallen boards and bent low, peering into the dark space beneath the broken roof. Inside, he saw a woman trapped under a heavy beam, holding a baby close to her chest. Her face was pale and her eyes were tired, but they filled with relief when she saw him. The cowboy did not stop to think. He dropped to his knees and reached for the nearest piece of wood, pulling it away with both hands. The beam was heavy and the dirt around it was packed tight. His fingers slipped on rough edges and small cuts opened on his skin, but he kept going. The woman spoke in a weak voice, telling him the cabin had collapsed during the night when the wind grew strong and the rain fell hard. She had tried to move the beam, but it was too heavy. She had been calling out all day, hoping someone would pass by. The baby stirred in her arms and let out a small sound that made the cowboy move faster. He pulled away loose boards and stones, creating a small space around the woman. He spoke to her calmly, telling her she was going to be okay and that he would not leave. His voice was steady, even though his arms began to shake from the effort. The sky outside grew darker, and the first stars appeared above the trees. The cold crept closer, and the wind found its way through the broken walls of the cabin. The cowboy took off his coat and draped it over the woman and the baby to keep them warm. He then used a long branch as a lever, placing it under the beam and pushing down with all his weight. The beam lifted just a little, enough for him to slide his hand under and move a piece of wood that had trapped the woman's leg. The woman gasped as her leg came free, and tears rolled down her face, not from pain but from relief. The cowboy kept working, his breath coming in heavy clouds in the cold air. Finally, after what felt like a long and endless time, he managed to clear enough space for her to move. He helped her sit up slowly, making sure she was steady. The baby rested quietly against her chest now, wrapped in the cowboy's coat. The woman looked around at the broken cabin, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. She whispered a soft thank you, her voice filled with emotion. The cowboy stood and offered her his arm. Together they made their way out of the ruined cabin and into the open air. The night had fully arrived, and the moon cast a pale light over the land. His horse lifted its head and gave a soft sound when it saw them. The cowboy knew they could not stay there. The cold would grow stronger, and the woman was too weak to walk far. He helped her onto the horse carefully, making sure she was balanced and holding the baby safely. He then took the reins and began to lead the horse down the path toward the nearest town, which he knew was miles away but their only chance for warmth and rest. As they moved through the quiet land, the woman told him her name and thanked him again and again. The cowboy listened, nodding and offering small words of comfort. The baby shifted slightly but stayed calm, wrapped in the coat and held close. The sound of the horse's steps filled the silence, steady and strong. The moon followed them across the sky, and the stars shone like small lights of hope above their heads. The cowboy felt tired, but his heart was steady and focused. He knew this night would stay with him forever, not because of the cold or the hard work, but because of the choice he made to stop, listen, and help when it mattered most. The cowboy guided his horse slowly through the uneven ground, keeping careful balance as the woman clung to the baby in her arms. She shivered slightly, both from the cold night air and from exhaustion. Her face, pale under the moonlight, reflected relief mixed with fear. She whispered soft words to her child, telling him he was safe now, even as her voice trembled. The cowboy stayed close, speaking calmly, trying to reassure them both. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I'm not going to leave you. Just hold on a little longer, and we'll get you somewhere warm." The baby, though weak and quiet, shifted in his mother's arms. He let out a soft whimper, but did not cry loudly. The cowboy's heart ached as he saw how tiny and fragile the child was. He could tell the baby had been trapped for hours, maybe more, under the collapsed cabin. The thought made him move faster, though he kept his tone steady, afraid sudden panic might scare the woman or the baby. The wind blew stronger as they made their way through the open land. The cowboy adjusted the horse's reins, leaning slightly forward to guide it carefully over rocks and small dips in the trail. He could see the glow of a few distant lanterns and a tiny town ahead, but it was still miles away. Every step of the horse brought them closer, and yet the long distance felt heavy on his shoulders. He kept silent, letting the woman and baby rest as much as possible. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft and weak. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come," she said. I thought no one would ever find us." She swallowed hard, glancing down at her child. He might not have made it." Her voice broke slightly, and she hugged the baby closer. The cowboy did not answer with words, but gave a small nod, letting her know he understood. His silence was meant to calm her, not to seem uncaring. He remembered the moment he had first seen them under the heavy beam. The cabin had collapsed completely during the storm, and the weight of the wood had pinned the woman in place. He had been worried at first that the roof was too heavy to move, but when he heard the baby's cries, fear had changed into determination. Now he could still feel the soreness in his arms from pulling, lifting, and shifting the broken wood. His fingers had tiny cuts and dirt was under his nails, but none of that mattered. What mattered was getting them out and to safety. The woman shifted slightly, trying to adjust herself on the horse. She was still weak, and the baby was small enough that she needed to hold him close to her chest at all times. The cowboy reached out, steadying her with one hand. Just hold him tight," he said gently. "I'll make sure we get there safely." She nodded, her eyes full of gratitude and exhaustion. The wind howled around them, rustling the trees and carrying the smell of wet earth from the storm that had passed hours before. Small patches of mud made the trail slippery, and the cowboy slowed the horse whenever he saw uneven ground. Every movement had to be careful. One wrong step could hurt the woman or baby. He had guided horses many times before, but never with someone so fragile on board, and the responsibility weighed on him more than he could describe. The baby stirred again, letting out a tiny sigh, and the woman's hand moved to gently brush his hair. She whispered his name softly, a name the cowboy could not hear clearly over the wind, but it sounded tender and full of love. For a moment he let himself imagine what it would have been like if no one had come. He pushed the thought away quickly, focusing on the trail ahead and the lights that grew slowly brighter in the distance. Hours seemed to pass, even though only a little time had gone by. The moon hung high, giving them soft light to see the path. The cowboy spoke now and then, telling stories about the land, about the animals, and about small adventures he had while riding. The words were simple, nothing extraordinary, but they helped the woman stay awake, kept her mind away from the fear and pain of the collapse. Sometimes the baby would stir slightly at his voice, but then settle again, reassured by the calm tone. The woman looked up at him once and asked quietly, "Will we make it?" Her voice was small, almost lost in the wind. The cowboy met her eyes and gave a firm nod. "Yes," he said. "You'll be warm soon. You'll be safe. Just hold on a little longer." The words carried strength, even though he felt his own body tiring. He had been riding, walking, and lifting for hours, but determination filled every corner of his being. As they continued, the cowboy noticed small details he had missed before. The baby's fingers were pale, and his little body shook lightly. The woman's breathing was heavy, and she was leaning slightly forward, trying to protect him from the cold. He shifted the horse's saddle slightly to give her more support, speaking softly the whole time. Every small adjustment mattered. Every careful movement could make the difference between danger and safety. The terrain grew rougher. Small hills and rocks made the horse stumble slightly, and the cowboy had to lean back to prevent a fall. He whispered encouragement to the animal, reminding it to keep moving steadily. The woman's grip tightened on the baby, and he could feel the tension in her arms. He spoke to her gently, letting her know it was almost over, even though they were still far from town. Her eyes met his, filled with gratitude and trust, and for a moment, he felt a deep connection that needed no words. The wind shifted suddenly, bringing the faint smell of smoke. The cowboy realized there must be someone awake in the town keeping a fire burning. He felt hope rise in his chest, a warmth that went deeper than the cold he had felt all evening. The lights ahead glimmered brighter now, and the town seemed closer with every step. He encouraged the horse to move a little faster, careful still of the uneven ground. The woman spoke again, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and relief. She told him about the collapse, how the storm had struck suddenly in the night, and how she had been trapped under the beams, unable to move her legs. She whispered about her fear for her child, and the cowboy listened silently, nodding, letting her pour out her story. She spoke of the long hours spent hoping someone would find them, and of the pain and uncertainty she had felt as the dark night grew colder. The cowboy's hands ached from holding the reins, and his back felt stiff from hours of guiding the horse carefully. He had been tired before, but now his focus was sharper than ever. He had learned long ago that fear or fatigue would only slow him down. His determination to get them to safety kept him steady, even as the cold wind whipped around them. Finally, after what seemed like endless miles, the lights of the town grew larger and clearer. The glow of lanterns and windows gave him a sense of relief he could hardly describe. The woman tightened her grip on the baby, and the baby stirred slightly again, sensing the warmth and hope. The cowboy spoke to both of them, reminding them that they were almost there, that soon they would be in a safe place. The town seemed alive despite the late hour. Windows glowed with soft light, and he could hear faint voices of people still awake. His heart lifted. He guided the horse down the last stretch of uneven ground, careful not to make sudden movements. The woman's body relaxed slightly, trusting him completely. The baby's tiny fingers curled around her coat, and he could feel the child's small heartbeat against her chest. At last, they reached the first house with a lit lantern outside. The cowboy knocked loudly on the door, calling for help. A man opened it, surprised at first, but quickly understanding the situation. The cowboy led the woman and baby inside carefully, letting them rest against warm blankets in the soft glow of the fire. The townspeople hurried to help, wrapping the baby in fresh cloths and checking the woman for injuries. The cowboy finally sat back, exhausted but relieved. He watched as the woman cradled her child, safe at last. She looked up at him, her eyes full of tears and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "You saved us." The cowboy simply nodded, a quiet smile on his face. He knew the danger was over for now, and that the baby would sleep safely in his mother's arms. The warmth of the fire filled the room, and the sounds of the town, voices, footsteps, and laughter, made him realize that hope had returned. Though his body ached and his hands were sore, the cowboy felt a deep satisfaction. He had acted without hesitation when it mattered most. He had listened, he had moved quickly, and he had refused to leave those in need. Now, with the woman and her child safe, he could finally rest, knowing that courage and care had made a real difference. The night continued outside, but inside the warm room, the baby slept peacefully, the woman rested, and the cowboy stood quietly, keeping watch. He knew that tomorrow would bring more work, more riding, and more challenges, but for now, everything was calm. The sound of the fire crackling and the soft breathing of the baby reminded him why he rode across the lonely plains, why he helped those in need, and why courage, even in small acts, could change lives forever. The next morning, the cowboy awoke before the sun had fully risen. The room was quiet, except for the soft breathing of the woman and her baby. The fire had burned low overnight, leaving behind warm embers that still glowed faintly. He stretched carefully, feeling the stiffness in his back and the soreness in his arms from the long ride and the hard work of digging the woman and child out of the collapsed cabin. But despite the aches, his heart felt light. They were alive, and that knowledge gave him strength. He glanced at the woman, who was sitting on a chair, her baby wrapped in blankets and held close to her chest. Her eyes were tired, but she smiled softly when she noticed him watching. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked quietly. The cowboy shook his head. "Not really," he replied. "Kept thinking about getting you both here safely. Couldn't rest until you were warm and fed." She nodded, understanding the quiet dedication behind his words. After a moment, the woman stood, wincing slightly from her injuries, and moved to prepare a small breakfast. She had been in the town only a short while, but the people had helped her gather food and blankets. The cowboy offered to help, but she gently waved him back. "You've already done more than anyone could ask," she said. "Sit, rest. Let me take care of the baby and myself for a bit." He nodded, appreciating the simple kindness of her words. It felt good to be trusted, to know that the smallest acts of courage had earned her confidence. Once breakfast was ready, they ate quietly together, the warmth of the room easing the chill from the night before. The cowboy spoke little, but his presence was steady and reassuring. Every so often the baby stirred and the woman soothed him, whispering softly so as not to wake him fully. The cowboy watched, feeling a sense of awe at her gentle care. Despite the fear and pain of the previous night, she remained calm for her child, determined to protect him. After they finished, the woman spoke again. "I want to tell you everything," she said. "How we ended up there, trapped in that cabin." She took a deep breath, her voice steady, and began to recount the story. The cowboy listened carefully, never interrupting. Her words painted a vivid picture of the storm that had swept through the area, how the wind had bent trees and how the roof of their small cabin had collapsed under the sudden weight of fallen branches and debris. She described how she had tried to keep the baby safe, using her own body to shield him from falling wood, and how every moment had felt like an eternity as she hoped someone would come. The cowboy could see the strength it had taken for her to survive. Her voice did not break, though her eyes glistened with tears. He nodded silently, letting her words sink in. He could feel the weight of her experience, and it made him grateful that he had been in the right place at the right time to help. It reminded him why he rode across the lonely plains, always keeping an eye out for those who might need assistance. After the story, the cowboy rose and helped the woman and her baby prepare to leave the house. She needed more rest, but it was time to move toward the town's doctor to ensure she and her child were fully safe. The town doctor had already checked them briefly, but a longer examination was necessary. The cowboy's presence reassured her as she gathered her blankets and small belongings. The baby lay quietly, wrapped warmly and held gently in his mother's arms. Once they were ready, the cowboy led them back to his horse, which had been stabled nearby under the care of a kind townsman. He helped the woman onto the saddle, positioning her carefully so she could hold the baby securely. "Hold him tight," he said softly. "I'll make sure we get there safely." She nodded, trusting him completely. The horse shifted slightly beneath them, and he steadied it before mounting himself. The ride to the doctor's office was slow but steady. The horse moved carefully over uneven paths, avoiding rocks and patches of mud. The wind had died down since the storm, but the air was still cold. The cowboy kept his focus sharp, ensuring the woman and baby were protected at every step. He spoke occasionally, telling small stories of his travels across the plains, keeping their minds off the worry and fatigue from the previous night. The woman smiled softly at his stories, and the baby stirred slightly, soothed by the sound of his voice. Along the way, they passed familiar parts of the town, people going about their morning routines. Some stopped to wave or call greetings, recognizing the cowboy and perhaps aware of the story that had spread about his bravery. The woman felt a quiet sense of relief, knowing that help and community surrounded them now. Her baby cooed softly in her arms, a small, hopeful sound that brought a warmth to the cowboy's heart. Upon reaching the doctor's office, the doctor greeted them warmly. He examined the baby first, checking for any injuries, signs of shock, or lingering effects from the stress of being trapped. Then he turned his attention to the woman, carefully assessing her arms, legs, and back. Both examinations went smoothly, revealing no serious injuries, though some bruising and soreness remained. The doctor praised the cowboy for his quick actions. "You saved them," he said firmly. "Had you not been there, I don't know if they would have made it through the night." The woman smiled at the cowboy, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said softly. He shrugged, a small smile on his face. "I just did what anyone should do," he said quietly. "I couldn't leave you there, that's all." The baby shifted slightly, and she hugged him closer, whispering softly, letting him know he was safe. The cowboy watched, feeling a quiet pride at the small life he had helped preserve. After the doctor's visit, the woman and baby were given a room to rest and recover. The townspeople had brought extra blankets and food, making the space warm and welcoming. The cowboy stayed for a short while, ensuring they were settled and comfortable. He helped move the blankets around the baby and adjusted them over the woman's shoulders to keep her warm. Once he was satisfied that they were safe, he stepped back and looked at them, his chest full of a quiet sense of accomplishment. Before leaving, the woman spoke again. "You've done more than I could have ever imagined," she said softly. "Because of you, we're alive. I'll never forget this." The cowboy nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Just remember to take care of each other," he replied. "That's what matters now." He mounted his horse and gave a gentle nudge to set it moving. Slowly he rode away from the warm light of the house and into the morning sky, feeling the stiffness in his muscles but also a deep sense of fulfillment. As he rode, he reflected on the events of the night before, Every moment of danger, every second spent digging and lifting, came back vividly in his mind. The fear, the uncertainty, the tiny cries of the baby, they all mixed with the overwhelming relief when he finally saw them safe. He realized that courage often came not from strength alone, but from persistence, quick thinking, and a refusal to give up on someone in need. Each choice, each small action, had made a difference. The cowboy continued on the trail, the early sun rising behind him and painting the plains in golden light. The wind was gentle now, carrying the soft sounds of birds and rustling grass. He knew the woman and her child would rest, recover, and continue their lives, now touched by his presence and bravery. And, though he would soon disappear into the vast land once more, his actions that night would leave a lasting impact on 3 lives forever changed. As the day grew brighter, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had learned something important, that even one person's courage, even one act of determination, could save lives, restore hope, and remind people of the goodness still present in the world. The plains stretched wide before him, quiet and vast, but the cowboy rode on with a steady heart, knowing he had made a real difference, and that sometimes being in the right place at the right time was all it took to change everything. By the time the cowboy and the woman reached the small town's main street, the first rays of sunlight were spreading across the sky. The world was bathed in soft golden light, and the cold night seemed like a distant memory. The air smelled fresh, with hints of dew and warm earth. The cowboy guided his horse carefully along the cobblestone path, making sure the woman and her baby stayed steady. The baby, now wrapped securely in blankets, slept quietly against his mother's chest, trusting her warmth and safety. The town was slowly waking up. Shopkeepers opened doors, and children ran across the street, laughing as they headed toward the schoolhouse. Some townspeople paused to look at the unusual sight, a cowboy leading a woman with a small child on horseback. Whispers spread quickly. Word of the previous night's bravery had already begun to travel. People remembered hearing faint cries from the collapsed cabin, and now they saw the man who had refused to leave them behind. There was a quiet awe in the way the townsfolk watched, a mixture of respect and curiosity. The cowboy guided the horse to the front of the town's doctor's office. The building was simple but solid, with clean white walls and a warm glow from the windows. The doctor himself was waiting, having been told that someone had brought the woman and baby safely through the night. When the doors opened, the woman carefully dismounted, holding her child close. The cowboy stayed close behind, steadying the horse and ensuring no one was hurt in the small crowd gathering outside. Once inside, the doctor immediately began examining the woman. He checked her arms, her legs, and her back for any hidden injuries from being trapped under the cabin. He was thorough but gentle, making sure she felt safe and comfortable. The woman answered his questions quietly, still tired but fully aware of her surroundings. The baby stirred, sensing the new voices and movement, but remained calm, held closely by his mother. The doctor then turned his attention to the baby, checking for any signs of stress or minor injuries. After a few careful moments, he smiled. "They're both going to be fine," he said, relief in his voice. "You did a good job, young lady, keeping him safe." The woman smiled weakly but gratefully, her eyes glistening. She looked at the cowboy, and her gratitude was clear. "I don't know how I can ever thank you," she whispered. The cowboy shook his head, brushing the comment aside. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone should do," he said quietly. There was no pride in his voice, only calm honesty. The doctor nodded in agreement, recognizing the courage it had taken to ride through the storm and ensure their safety. After the initial examinations, the doctor offered a small room where the woman and baby could rest properly. The townspeople had prepared it with warm blankets, a small bed for her, and extra cloths for the baby. The cowboy helped her settle, making sure she was comfortable and that the baby remained warm. She arranged the blankets carefully, tucking the baby close and wrapping herself snugly. The cowboy watched quietly, feeling a mix of relief and quiet satisfaction. Once the woman and child were safely resting, the doctor spoke to the cowboy privately. "You saved lives last night," he said. "You risked your own safety for them." "That is something very few people would do." The cowboy simply nodded. "I couldn't leave them there," he replied. "They had no one else." The doctor's gaze softened with understanding, knowing that courage often came in quiet moments without need for recognition or praise. The woman eventually sat up and spoke softly, addressing the cowboy again. "Because of you, my baby has a future," she said. "He will grow up safe and healthy. I don't know what would have happened without you." Her words were steady, filled with emotion, and they reached the cowboy in a way he could not ignore. He had acted quickly, driven only by instinct, but hearing the real-life impact of his actions made him feel the weight of responsibility he had carried and the relief of success. The baby stirred once more, letting out a tiny sigh, and the woman smiled down at him. "See, he's fine," she said softly. The cowboy watched, noting the calmness of the child and the mother's gentle care. He thought about the collapsed cabin, the darkness, and the cold. It seemed so far away now, almost like a bad dream. And yet, it had all been real, and it had demanded every bit of courage he could summon. The townspeople began to bring small gifts of food and clean blankets. Some offered kind words, and others simply watched with quiet respect. The cowboy remained a steady presence, allowing the woman to take the attention she deserved. He understood that she and her child were the focus now, and that his role was simply to support and ensure they were safe until help arrived. Later, as the morning progressed, the woman spoke to the cowboy again, explaining how the cabin had been her home for many years. She told him about her life before the storm, the quiet days spent tending to the small garden behind the cabin, and the nights she had spent reading by candlelight with her child nearby. She described how the storm had come without warning, how she had tried to protect her baby with her own body, and how each moment trapped under the debris had felt endless. The cowboy listened quietly, absorbing her story without interruption. Her voice carried the weight of survival, but also a quiet strength that left a mark on him. The doctor returned with more instructions, explaining that they would need to stay in town for a short while to fully recover. The woman nodded, grateful for the care. The cowboy assisted her in gathering the few belongings she had brought, placing them in a small bag. He ensured the baby was secure and comfortable, held close to her chest. The small room, filled with warmth and light, now became a temporary home, a safe space for recovery and a symbol of hope after the chaos of the previous night. As they prepared to leave the office, the woman turned to the cowboy one last time. "You gave me and my child a second chance at life," she said. "I will never forget what you have done." The cowboy smiled gently, his eyes soft. "Just take care of each other," he said. "That's all that matters now." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of his experience and the quiet strength he had shown in the storm. He helped her onto the horse once more, ensuring the baby was secure and warm. Slowly they rode through the streets of the town, the early sunlight bathing everything in soft colors. The townspeople watched with admiration, and a few waved, offering quiet congratulations and praise. The cowboy did not seek recognition, but he felt a small sense of fulfillment. He had done the right thing, and now the woman and her child were safe. As they left the main streets and headed toward the edge of town, the cowboy thought about the night's events. The fear, the struggle, and the endless digging in the cold were still vivid in his mind, but now they were accompanied by relief and hope. Every moment of courage, every decision made in haste but with care had led to this. The woman and her child would live because he had acted, because he had refused to leave them behind, and because he had kept his focus on their safety above all else. The baby stirred again, making soft noises, and the woman whispered comforting words. The cowboy watched her carefully, adjusting his pace so that she remained steady. Every mile now was easier, filled with the promise of a new day and the warmth of safety. He knew that this story would remain in his memory forever, not as a tale of hardship, but as a reminder of what courage and quick action could accomplish. When they finally reached the edge of town, the woman's temporary lodging was in sight. It was a small, sturdy cabin, warm and welcoming, prepared by kind townspeople. She dismounted with the baby still in her arms, her eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. The cowboy helped her with a few final adjustments to ensure the baby was secure, then stepped back. The sun now fully lit the town, casting everything in a golden glow. The woman turned toward him, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You have changed our lives forever," she said. "My child will grow up safe because of you." The cowboy nodded silently. He did not need to reply with words. The look in his eyes and the small gesture of a nod conveyed everything he needed to say. That he had done what anyone should have done, that he felt fulfillment in saving lives, and that he hoped they would now live in peace. As he mounted his horse and prepared to ride back toward the open plains, the woman waved, holding her baby high in a small gesture of thanks. The cowboy returned the wave briefly, then turned the horse toward the horizon. The warm light of the morning filled his vision. The wind carried the soft scents of the land, and the sound of the town faded behind him. He rode steadily, reflecting on the events of the past hours. The fear, the struggle, and the courage would always remain with him, shaping the man he was and the quiet strength he carried wherever he went. The plains stretched out ahead, vast and golden in the morning light. The cowboy rode on, knowing that sometimes one person's courage could change everything, and that acts of selfless determination could leave an impact on lives forever. The woman and her child were safe, and that knowledge warmed him more than the sun or fire ever could. He had done what mattered most. He had given them hope, life, and a future. The morning air was crisp as the cowboy rode away from the small town. The sun had fully risen, painting the plains in golden light, and the wind carried the fresh scent of earth and grass. He felt a deep calm, knowing that the woman and her baby were safe and warm, cared for by the townspeople. Their lives had been changed forever, and he had played a role in giving them hope and a future. The thought filled him with quiet satisfaction, though he said nothing out loud. Words were not needed. The relief in their eyes and the calm in the baby's breathing said it all. As he moved further into the open plains, the vastness of the land stretched endlessly before him. Rolling hills, green pastures, and clusters of trees passed by in a slow, peaceful rhythm. His horse moved steadily, the sound of hooves a gentle beat against the soft earth. The cowboy thought back to the events of the past night, reliving each moment. The sudden storm, the broken cabin, the cries of the baby, the weight of the fallen beams, and the intense effort it took to free them. He remembered the woman's fear, the baby's weak cries, and the pounding of his own heart as he worked. Every detail remained vivid in his mind, but now it was accompanied by relief, pride, and the quiet joy of knowing that lives had been saved. He rode on in silence for a while, letting the beauty of the plains and the quiet morning ease his thoughts. The world seemed calm, as if it were giving him a moment to breathe after the chaos of the storm. Small animals scurried along the edges of the trail, and birds called softly from the trees. It was a simple, peaceful scene, yet it carried a sense of profound meaning. Life went on, but he knew that his actions had made a lasting difference. He felt the weight of responsibility lighten in his chest, replaced by a calm strength that came from doing the right thing when it mattered most. Hours passed as he continued across the land. The sun climbed higher, warming his back and drying the dew on the grass. He thought about the woman and her baby, imagining them waking up in the town's safe room, eating warm food and resting comfortably. He hoped they would feel secure, surrounded by people who cared. The memory of the baby's tiny hand gripping his mother's coat and the woman's quiet strength stayed with him, a reminder of what courage and care could accomplish in a single night. Eventually he reached a small hill that overlooked the open plains. He stopped for a moment, letting his horse rest and drinking from his canteen. He looked out over the land, the horizon stretching endlessly in all directions. The sun glinted off distant streams, and the wind whispered through the tall grass. In that quiet moment, he felt a deep connection to the world around him. The plains were vast and unforgiving, yet they held beauty, peace, and endless possibility. And somewhere out there, the woman and her child were safe, their lives forever touched by his courage. He mounted his horse again and began riding toward the distant mountains, a place he often went to find solitude and think. The path was long, but the journey was comforting. The wind on his face, the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves, and the endless sky above created a sense of freedom. Yet beneath it all, he carried the memory of the night's events, the fear, the struggle, and the triumph. He had faced danger and uncertainty, but he had acted without hesitation, driven only by the need to protect others. That decision had made all the difference. As he rode, he thought about the lessons he had learned. Courage was not always loud or grand. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and unassuming. It was the choice to act when no one else could, the determination to keep going even when the odds were against you, and the willingness to face danger for the sake of someone else. That night, he had learned the true meaning of courage. He had saved a life and ensured the future of another, all without seeking reward or recognition. The plains began to change as he approached a small river that cut through the land. He guided his horse carefully down the gentle slope, letting it drink from the clear water. The sun's reflection danced on the surface, and the cowboy paused to take a deep breath, filling his lungs with the clean, fresh air. In that moment, he felt a sense of peace unlike any he had known before. The storm, the fear, and the darkness of the previous night seemed distant now, replaced by light, warmth, and the quiet rhythm of life. He continued riding, the baby's small face and the woman's grateful eyes still vivid in his mind. He knew that they would carry that night with them forever, just as he would. It was a story of survival, courage, and hope. A story that proved that even in the darkest moments, help could come when it was most needed. And sometimes, all it took was one person willing to act without hesitation, guided only by the simple desire to save a life. By mid-afternoon, the cowboy reached a familiar ridge that overlooked his own home. The small house, simple and sturdy, stood surrounded by a few trees and a pasture for his horse. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, promising warmth and rest. He guided the horse down the hill, feeling the soreness in his muscles, but also a quiet satisfaction. He had faced danger, helped those in need, and returned them safely to warmth and care. That was all that mattered. He dismounted and tied his horse to a post near the barn, patting its neck with gentle gratitude. The animal had been steady, calm, and reliable through the night, and the cowboy knew it deserved acknowledgement. He led the horse into the shelter, then returned to his own home. The door creaked softly as he opened it, letting in the warmth of the small fire he had lit before leaving. The room smelled faintly of smoke and wood, comforting after the cold night and long journey. He sat quietly, letting the events of the past hours settle in his mind. Every moment, from the collapsed cabin to the quiet town, was vivid. He could still feel the weight of the wood he had lifted, the tension in the woman's arms as she held her baby, and the soft cries that had driven him forward. Those memories would stay with him forever, a reminder of what it meant to act with courage, compassion, and determination. As the day turned to evening, the cowboy prepared a simple meal and sat by the fire. He thought about the woman and her child, hoping they were safe and beginning to recover fully. He imagined them smiling, the baby cooing happily, and the woman feeling relief and peace. That vision brought a quiet smile to his face. He knew that sometimes small acts of bravery could change lives in ways that would never be forgotten. Night fell again, but this time it felt peaceful rather than frightening. The plains were calm, and the stars glimmered above like tiny beacons of hope. The cowboy stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the cool night air and listening to the soft sounds of the land. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth. He thought about the journey, the lives saved, and the courage it had taken. He realized that every choice, every small action, could matter more than one could ever imagine. He returned inside, sitting by the fire and letting the warmth seep into his tired body. The events of the night and day had left him exhausted, but also filled with a quiet, deep satisfaction. He had acted when it mattered most, saved lives, and ensured that hope continued for two people who had faced danger alone. That knowledge, more than any rest or comfort, gave him peace. The cowboy lay down for the night, feeling the ache in his muscles, but also a sense of fulfillment. He knew that tomorrow would bring its own challenges, work, and tasks, but the memory of this night would remain with him forever. It was a story of courage, survival, and hope. A reminder that in the face of fear and danger, one person could make all the difference. As he drifted into sleep, he thought once more of the woman and her baby, safe and cared for in the small town. Their lives had been forever changed, and his actions had made that possible. The wind whispered softly outside, the stars shone brightly above, and the plains stretched endlessly, full of possibilities. For the cowboy, it was a quiet ending, but also a beginning, a life forever touched by courage, compassion, and the simple choice to act when it mattered most.